Hi, I'm Sarah Evans, and with me today is Pieter-Louis Myburgh, author of the just released book Gangster State, unveiling Ace Magashule's web of capture. Welcome, Pieter-Louis. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Pieter-Louis, let's start at the beginning. What piqued your interest about Ace Magashule in terms of what made you realize that this was somebody that deserved more than just a story, but deserved a whole book?
Sure. Look, I think we've all been grappling with this issue of state capture for the last couple of years now. And state capture, as it's been portrayed and investigated by the media, has been a very nationally focused sort of endeavor. You know, we've looked at the state capture that unfolded around the Gupta family, that took place at your Escoms and Transnets and national departments, whilst on the periphery almost in the political landscape, the same kind of problems evidently was present in South Africa over the last couple of years in provinces like Mpumalanga, Limpopo, KwaZulu, and then especially in the Free State. So for many, many years, there's been these indications and rumors and a few media exposés here and there about what appeared to have been a state capture run by Ace Magashule. And I really viewed it as something that needed to deserve broad scrutiny and proper research to get to the bottom of what really is an extension of South Africa's ongoing state capture problem.
Why has this issue been underreported?
I think one reason might be because of the very fact that, you know, some of these transgressions happen outside of the urban centra. So it might, to an extent, be a media problem, maybe. I think a greater problem is in a province like the Free State, whistleblowers have been few and far between because it was really, if you speak to people on the ground there, an environment where people literally feared for their lives. There was a culture of fear in the provincial political setup and in government structures, and along with that, there's a couple of people who've been killed in the Free State. There's an auditor from the Auditor General's office who was killed a few years before, who looked into corruption in the Free State. So I think that certainly played a very large part.
Well, I think certainly this is the first effort that's been made to connect all of those parts together, as opposed to these bits and pieces that have been reported over the years. And the picture that you really get is of a capture effort that really ran very deep. Can you describe to us a little bit about the modus operandi of Ace Magashule, as it were, and just how big was this capture project?
Look, I think it was vast and incredibly expansive. So the picture that I definitely walked away with after researching the book and literally, speaking to scores of people from various departments, HRDs, MECs, even people who literally sat on his exco and were previously part of his sort of political factions. They all paint a picture of a provincial structure and of a man that, almost like a mafia don, sat atop the province's government structures and with an absolute iron fist exerted himself in the procurement decisions of various provincial departments and entities. And I bring this to light through several examples in the book. For instance, there's a string of very dubious RDP projects, contracts that were awarded in the Free State in around 2010, about 1 billion rands, contracts for low-cost housing. And there was an investigation into how it could be that, some of the contractors got their contracts without tender processes, without the proper procurement regulations being adhered to. And time again, when mid-level officials are confronted with a question by investigators, for instance, why did you sidestep procurement rules? Why didn't you stick to the rules? The answer would be that these were political orders coming right from the top, coming from Ace Magashule. The contracts had to be channeled in certain ways. So that is kind of how scary the control was that Magashule exerted over the procurement decisions in the province. So that is one part of his modus operandi. I think a second one worth highlighting is it's a man who was very adept at covering his tracks, I believe. It's someone who left very few direct fingerprints on some of these corrupt dealings. And I now understand, and having spoken to people who worked around him, how he operated, in terms of using different cell phones for giving certain orders, having face-to-face meetings rather instead of sending around emails or having talks over the phone. And then, of course, the issue that I unpack in the book is this apparent habit of continuously receiving large amounts of cash. Brown envelopes, there's a mention of the Atul Gupta envelope, and then some mention of other contractors also who pay their dues in cash.
So just how rich is Ace Magashule?
So I think wealth, from an investigative journalism perspective, is something we always try to sort of determine in terms of assets, right? So you would go and look at somebody's properties, his vehicles, and that at least gives you some sort of an idea of his net worth. Ace Magashule doesn't really have much of that. But what I do suspect is, and I've started to pick this up, is that through his daughter, for instance, Toko Malembe, and other family members, I think they become representatives of the wealth that he channels towards them. The properties they hold are probably, to a large extent, really for his beneficial use. There's a house that one of his sons, Tsepiso Magashule, lived in Saxon World, very close to the Guptas. And that is a property that was used by Ace Magashule for meeting with people, for business people. It's one of the issues I unpack in the book. So it's very difficult to say that there's an amassed bundle of cash somewhere that is stashed away. I would not be surprised if that was the case. But then, as I've mentioned earlier, being a man who seemed to have had a penchant for handing in cash, I think a lot of it just came in and was spent. Then there are these indications of him have to use a lot of his money for patronage and paying off literally people to stay in his camp.
So a lot of what he's trading in is not cash, it's actually political currency as well. And from what I read, propping up the system of power that he has, has been working at for so many years.
Yes, no, definitely. I think one sort of exhibition of that, or one example of that, is the kind of the patronage that he, that he doled out in the Free State was through positions at municipalities, at government departments. And I'm actually increasingly starting to get, and it's always good about, publishing a book like this, is really actually only then opens the floodgates in terms of people contacting you. And I've got a extensive list of people who are alleged to be, or who are said to be in positions, senior positions at municipalities, CFOs, municipal managers, HODs of departments, even the director generals of departments, and even MECs, who directly have their jobs to thanks to Ace Magashule, and because they were required to remain in his camp politically to ensure that within the ANC structures he could remain ANC chairperson and thus remain in power in the province.
Wow, so those admissions are really, it's very rare that you get individuals who can describe to you exactly how that power patronage relationship really works.
Certainly, yeah, and I think that'll only increase as time unfolds. I think as I said, the floodgates are opening. On Friday, MEC Mtolisi Dukwana, who was an MEC in Mr. Magashule's Exco back in the day, he'll be testifying at the Zondo Commission on Friday, and then we'll have a first-hand account for the first time at a commission of inquiry into Ace Magashule's state capture tactics from a MEC in his very own Exco.
So what about the criminal justice system? I think it is alluded to in your book, and you talk about the Scorpions being ready to arrest Ace 2008, I think it was. What happened?
I think what happened quite sadly and simply was that the Scorpions were disbanded, and all those investigations that they had in place and all those dockets seemingly simply were quashed or disappeared somehow. So the Scorpions were looking at a variety of issues. It's not only the cattle theft that I unpack in the book. I understand there's quite a couple of issues involving Ace Magashule's alleged role in corruption that they were ready to pounce on. And when the Scorpions were disbanded in 2009 to make way for the Hawks that we still have as our most elite corruption crime-busting unit, by all appearances, all these dockets seem to have disappeared, or at least lost momentum to such an extent that it never resulted in prosecution.
And outside of that lack of accountability in the criminal justice system, I mean, Ace Magashule still managed to rise to the position of Secretary General of the ANC. And although there have been no prosecutions, as your book explains, there's no lack of evidence to suggest that this is somebody who there are a lot of questions that he needs to answer.
Yeah.
How did that come about? How has he managed to evade political accountability for so long?
Yeah. So political accountability cannot really occur unless there's an impetus for it to occur, and that happens from the outside. So like the ANC says time and time again, we can only get rid of somebody if they are found guilty in the courts. Or like we saw the list process recently for the upcoming elections, these people are on the list because they haven't been found guilty in the court of law. But this is such a double-edged sword argument, because the very structures that are supposed to actually prosecute the Nomvula Mokonyanes, the Ace Magashules, all the people involved in corruption who have been involved in the recent allegations of Bosasa corruption, Gupta corruption, they were never prosecuted because the law enforcement environment was captured along with the other entities like Eskom and Transnet. So when the ANC tells us that they haven't been found guilty in court, it's a very disingenuous argument, because the environment simply didn't allow for that ever to occur. And that is how politically within the ANC, Ace Magashule could simply cruise through the structures and rise to almost the very top of the organization in December, because there was not a single successful criminal prosecution against him that would have hampered him from reaching that powerful position.
So the ANC, speaking of which, has had a very interesting reaction to your book. And they have called you, what did they call you? A fake news Stratcom book, right? Something along those lines. What is your response? Are you a Stratcom agent?
Absolutely not. I would love to see some evidence in that regard. It would make for a very interesting story, I'm sure. Look, no, I was disappointed when I saw the reaction, because, as a young journalist starting out in around 2010, working on some political stories, at least, initially on the surface, I remember the ANC as an organization that at least made an attempt to grapple with issues in an intellectual manner. I remember ANC spokesperson Smuts Ngonyama, for instance, who would never have his name attached to the kind of statement we saw issued yesterday, which is a complete far cry from the much more structured communication we've seen from the party a couple of years ago at least. That seems to have completely collapsed. It's also very disappointing to note that, and this has become a habit of late, or not of late even, in the last couple of years at least, the last 6-7 years, the ANC gets caught with its pants on its ankles, or one of its officials does, or a senior leader or party member, and the party immediately resorts to an ad hominem attack against the journalist or the media house, raises suspicion about the house, and nearly not a single word is uttered around the actual content of what is alleged or reported on, the core issues, the facts that are put on the table. And it is really sad. It's an avoidance of accountability. It is a deliberate ploy for the ANC to steer the conversation away from the facts on the table as quickly as possible, and instead change the conversation into something that is fed by these really crazy and unfounded accusations.
I mean, the one thing that they have said is that this book was brought out so that basically implying that you could influence the outcome of the election or hamper the ANC's prospects. That is a reaction you surely must have foreseen. What about the timing of this book? Why release it now before the election?
Sure. Look, it's a very interesting argument to make, because now you are saying that, okay, so there's a timing issue here. It was released before the elections. If I had waited strategically until after the elections, that is also a very deliberate political decision. So you're leaving a journalist who needs to publish a book that is in the public interest with very few choices in terms of when he can release the book. Should it be before? Should it be after? No, look, Ace Magashule's, my work on Ace Magashule dates from quite a long time before the current election cycle. I mean, anybody's welcome to go look at the timeline of publicly released articles on News 24 going back more than a year. And this book is a culmination of a research process that was concluded earlier this year, and the book was ripe for publishing. And the information contained in this book is absolutely of public interest, and it was time for the book to be published.
Pieter-Louis, tell us lastly, what is likely to happen from here on out? Are you hearing from your sources in the criminal justice system? Are there any movements in that direction? Are you hearing any reactions of surprise coming from, or outrage coming from within the ruling party? So is anyone going to be taking any action?
I really hope so. I think this is going to be a test for the supposedly uncaptured NPA and the uncaptured hawks. The cleanup, as supposedly we are led to believe at least, being initiated by Cyril Ramaphosa's New Dawn government. And he needs to be held to account for that. His government needs to be held to account for that. South Africans have become accustomed to seeing zero action taken against senior politicians who get involved in corruption. So this is but one example of where the hawks can now actually indicate to the public or show to the public that they are indeed now committed to investigating indications of corruption. It's really as simple as that. So only time will tell.
Pieter-Louis, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.